I want to make a prediction tonight that is specific enough to hold me accountable for it later. Andy Burnham will not just fail as Prime Minister, he will completely destroy what remains of the Labour Party before this country even reaches the next general election. I do not say this as a rhetorical flourish, and I certainly do not say it for dramatic effect. I say it because the conversations happening behind closed doors in Westminster right now, the ones completely omitted from the careful, sanitized briefings at Labour headquarters, point overwhelmingly to a structural collapse of historic proportions. Tonight, I want to walk you through the exact mechanism of how this is going to happen, because understanding the underlying mechanism matters far more than simply hearing the prediction itself. If you want a completely honest account of what is actually being discussed in the dark corridors of power, rather than the heavily scripted version Labour wants you to believe, subscribe to this channel right now, because what follows is not a piece of speculation built on vague hope or political grievance. It is a cold, calculated assessment built on a pattern this country has now watched repeat itself 7 times in a single decade. Let us begin with the single most important fact about how Andy Burnham arrived at the threshold of Downing Street in the first place, because it explains almost everything that is about to unfold. His victory in the Makerfield by-election, the very event that effectively cleared his path to the leadership, was built on a mathematical coincidence that cannot and will not ever be replicated nationally. Let's look at the raw reality of that day. Voters who wanted to stop Reform UK voted for him. At the exact same time, voters who wanted Keir Starmer gone also voted for him. Both of those entirely separate, entirely conflicting motivations happened to converge on a single name in a single constituency on one single afternoon. That is not a national mandate. That is an accident of timing dressed up by desperate Labour strategists as a historic strategic breakthrough, and Westminster's more serious, independent analysts have already said so plainly in terms that should have triggered far more caution within the party than it apparently did. The moment Andy Burnham attempts to translate that highly specific, unrepeatable local calculation into a national platform, the foundation cracks beneath his feet. Labour has mistaken a one-off for a movement, and a party that builds its entire survival strategy around a mathematical illusion is a party already standing on cracked foundations. The deep, underlying fragility beneath the surface of the Burnham project is already showing up in the data. Look at his polling numbers. His approval rating, which sat at a healthy, positive figure only a few short months ago, has already collapsed into negative territory. And think carefully about when it happened. It did so before he had made a single decision as Prime Minister. It happened. I want to make a prediction tonight that is specific enough to hold me accountable for it later. Andy Burnham will not be Prime Minister by Christmas. He had faced his first real crisis, and he signed a single piece of legislation that could reasonably be blamed for souring public opinion. This is entirely unprecedented in modern British political history. Every other incoming leader, however disappointing they eventually turned out to be, has at least been granted a brief, traditional grace period, a honeymoon period, where the public extends a line of credit just to let them find their footing. Andy Burnham has been denied even that. I want to pause here and ask you something directly, because I think your answer matters far more than anything the commentators are saying. If you have already made up your mind about Andy Burnham before he has even given his first official address from the steps of Downing Street, tell me down in the comments below exactly when you stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. Was it the precise moment he refused to say where the billions for his housing promises would actually come from? Was it watching him dodge question after question about the boats and the open borders? Or did you simply look at the cynical pattern of the last 10 years and decide you were not going to be fooled a 7th time? I genuinely want to know, because I suspect your answers say far more about the true state of this country than anything Westminster will ever admit to you publicly. The core reason Burnham will end the Labour Party before the next election lies in a brutal arithmetic contradiction that any voter with basic common sense can see. He has backed himself into a corner. He has promised both continuity with the existing fiscal rules inherited from the previous government and a massive, structural expansion of spending on social housing and a new national social care service. These two commitments cannot both be honoured. You cannot keep the rules exactly as they are while identifying a source of funding for tens of billions of pounds that nobody, including Burnham himself, has yet specified. Labour MPs understand basic arithmetic. They understand that this profound contradiction will need to be resolved very early in his premiership, and they understand that whichever direction he chooses to resolve it will completely alienate a massive portion of his own parliamentary support. If he abandons his spending commitments to preserve fiscal discipline and appease the markets, he instantly confirms to the working-class voters who believed his rhetoric that he is simply Starmer with a different accent, offering the exact same disappointing continuity dressed up in warmer phrases. If he abandons fiscal discipline to honour his promises to the left wing of his party, he risks triggering the exact same violent market reaction that destroyed Liz Truss within a matter of weeks. That is a comparison that every serious commentator in Westminster has already begun making privately, regardless of how reluctant Labour figures are to acknowledge it in public. This is the trap waiting for him, and everyone in Westminster knows it is waiting, because the contradiction has been entirely visible since before he even secured the leadership. Consider the position of Rachel Reeves and what her continued presence or potential removal signals about Burnham's broader credibility. Her record over 2 budgets has been genuinely damaging by any objective measure. We have seen significant historic increases in both taxation and government borrowing that have weighed heavily on growth and contributed to a notable rise in youth unemployment relative to other major European economies. If Burnham retains her as Chancellor, he inherits her record without having chosen it, and he will struggle to ever claim his government represents a genuine departure from what came before. If he removes her, he must immediately identify a replacement capable of correcting 2 years of accumulated fiscal damage, and to date, nobody close to Burnham's team has offered a name or a plan that would represent that correction. He is a man completely paralysed by his own contradictions, and that paralysis will sink the party's credibility completely. Now, let me tell you what I understand to be happening within the Parliamentary Labour Party itself right now, because this is where the real, immediate execution of his leadership will actually be carried out. The lesson every single Labour MP learned from the sudden collapse of Keir Starmer's premiership was brutally simple. They learned that a struggling leader can be brought down quickly, and that the MPs who move first against a sinking leader are rewarded for their judgment rather than punished for their disloyalty. Starmer discovered, far too late to save his own skin, that he had no tribal base of protection within his own party. He had no deep reserve of personal loyalty built up over decades that could carry him through a difficult storm. The moment his backbenchers sensed weakness, they moved. And once that momentum gathered pace, there was no mechanism left to stop it. Andy Burnham is stepping straight into an environment populated by MPs who have just lived through this exact experience and absorbed its lesson completely. These are not colleagues who will extend him patience out of habit, convention, or party loyalty. They are individuals who have recently watched in real time exactly how quickly a Prime Minister can be removed the moment his colleagues conclude he is more useful to them gone than retained. And Burnham arrives into this trap with even less personal capital than Starmer had. The manner of his sudden ascent, riding a wave of temporary momentum from a single, unrepeatable by-election, means he has had absolutely no time to build the deep personal relationships and political debts that traditionally protect a leader during their difficult early months in office. Internal channels close to the whip's office are already reporting that backbenchers are openly discussing distance rather than loyalty. They are doing the cold political math, and they are realizing that anchoring their survival to a leader with negative approval ratings is a losing strategy. If they sense that his economic contradictions are going to wipe out their seats, the party will tear itself apart in internal civil war long before a general election is triggered. While the internal machinery of the Labour Party eats itself alive from the inside, Nigel Farage and Reform UK are systematically preparing to dismantle them from the outside. This catastrophic vulnerability is the greatest political gift Burnham could have ever handed to his true opponents. Reform UK is not sitting on the sidelines of British politics anymore, waiting patiently for a normal 5-year electoral cycle to play out. They have been leading national polling consistently, they have won councils that had remained under single-party control for decades, and they have demonstrated repeatedly that they do not need to manufacture attacks against their opponents. They simply need to point at the widening gap between what mainstream politicians promise and what they actually deliver, and let that gap speak for itself. Burnham's platform, with its unresolved fiscal contradictions and its almost complete absence of substantive policy on immigration and the small boats crisis, the single issue that has done more than any other to fuel reform's rise, hands Farage exactly the ammunition he needs. The asylum hotel costs will not magically disappear simply because the Prime Minister has changed his tone. The boats will not stop crossing the Channel because a new face occupies Downing Street. Every single week that passes without meaningful, drastic progress on these specific, measurable issues becomes another week of evidence for reform's core argument, that changing the individual at the top changes absolutely nothing about the substance of how this country is actually governed. Reform will stand before the working-class communities that Labour desperately needs to survive and point out that Burnham has offered them nothing but personality and tone. And personality and tone do not survive sustained contact with a national electorate that has completely run out of patience. By the time the next election is called, Reform won't just be chipping away at Labour's support. They will have entirely hollowed out their traditional heartlands. This is why the timeline has been compressed so violently. When Keir Starmer took power, he at least possessed a massive parliamentary majority and an electorate that was willing to give him a brief, minimal runway simply because they wanted the previous government gone. Burnham has zero runway. He is replacing a failed Labour Prime Minister, inheriting an electorate that has watched 7 leaders fail in 10 years, and stepping into a parliamentary environment that has become completely unforgiving. The cumulative effect, I believe, compresses what took Starmer 2 years into a fraction of that time frame. I cannot tell you with absolute mathematical certainty that the specific date of the final fracture will fall before Christmas week rather than shortly after. What I can tell you with total confidence is the direction and the underlying dynamic of the crisis. A premiership beginning with negative approval, a parliamentary party primed for swift action against weakness, an unresolved fiscal contradiction that cannot survive contact with reality indefinitely, and an opposition movement that requires no manufactured controversy to make its case. These are not the conditions of a long, stable period of governance. These are the conditions of a party facing existential collapse. Andy Burnham is, in many ways, the purest possible product of a broken political culture. Decades in public life, cabinet positions held without leaving a particularly distinctive mark, and a media profile carefully cultivated as the reasonable, relatable alternative to Westminster dysfunction. And now, at the moment that profile has finally translated into the highest office in the land, a complete absence of the substantive preparation that office actually requires is laid bare for all to see. Westminster already knows what is coming. The conversations happening in the corridors away from the cameras reflect a level of private panic about Labour's future that goes considerably beyond what is being admitted publicly. MPs are doing the arithmetic on his contradictory fiscal promises and calculating whether their own survival depends on early distance from him. I do not make this prediction with any pleasure. A rapidly collapsing government is not good for this country, regardless of who occupies Downing Street while it happens. But pretending that Burnham represents a stable, sustainable alternative that will save Labour from an historic realignment would be a total disservice to anyone genuinely trying to understand where this is heading. Subscribe, share this video, and before you go, tell me down in the comments, do you think the Labour Party can survive the collapse of Andy Burnham, or is this the definitive end of the two-party system as we know it? I want to hear it from you. Thank you, and I will see you next time.